Okay, so difficult task of having the last panel, the graveyard, as I call it. I hope you're not too tired and you can bear with us. So we have our panel is about decoloniality and language policy. And what we agreed on with my two other panelists is that we would do a round of 3 questions, and then we can have 10, 15 minutes of interactions towards the end. So, to start off, I wanted to kick off with a question about the context of language use, language policy in your country. What is the linguistic situation in terms of media and communication usage, as well as journalism education in your country? And what is the position of local languages with respect to colonial languages? So I think Modestus wants to start, and then Sisanda, and then I'll be the last one because I'll also be contributing to the panel.
All right, thank you very much. Very briefly, I'll first look at take an overview of the linguistic situation in media and communication in Ghana. Now, Ghana is, like many African countries, a multilingual country with over 70 indigenous languages, 70. And then English is also used in Ghana. Now, English remains Ghana's sole official language, although it cannot be written and read by a significant number of the population. In fact, just last week, Ghana's government statistician announced officially that about 9 million Ghanaians cannot read and write, out of the 30 million Ghanaians that we have as of 2020. So this has a lot of implications, and maybe because of time, I cannot go into that. But the long and short of it is that language has assumed a very hegemonic position in Ghana. That it is English is used, English has assumed, a hegemonic position in Ghana, where it is used in all the official and prestigious places in the country, for example, in education, in the law courts, parliament, and so on. Now, for media and journalism, Ghana has almost no indigenous language newspaper as we speak. Efforts were made during the immediate post-independence period by missionaries and governments to establish some indigenous language newspapers, but they didn't succeed. So today, we have almost 100 active newspapers in Ghana, interestingly, but all of them are written in English. However, if we look at the broadcast media scene, it is, as my colleague Theodora said, it is currently replete with indigenous language outlets. So we have a lot of radio stations across the country that broadcast in the local languages. And I have to emphasize that Ghana is an interesting country because it's not very big. I'm a population, as I've said, of about 31 million now. But a check before I came here showed that there are almost 500 radio stations in the country. And out of these stations, close to about 450 broadcasts, either solely in a local language or in part in a local language. So this shows the popularity of indigenous language media in Ghana. And I think it's the same in other African countries. In fact, research has shown that Ghanaians generally are happy listening to news and getting other information in their own language. This could be because their indigenous languages speak directly to them, express their culture and identity. All right, now if I go into looking at the linguistic situation, journalism education, and the position of local languages with respect to colonial languages in the curriculum, I have to start by saying that there is a plethora of public and private tertiary journalism education institutions in Ghana, very many. Among the public universities in Ghana, I can mention my own institution, the Ghana Institute of Journalism, and then the University of Ghana has the Department of Communication Studies. Now, other institutions like the University of Cape Coast, the University of Education, Winneba, they all run media communication programs. Then there are quite a lot, very many private ones doing virtually the same thing. However, journalism education and the curriculum and teaching are exclusively in English, leaving no space for the Ghanaian languages in journalism education. This is significant because if you look at the trend, as we have said, today, almost 80% of the radio stations broadcast in the local languages. Yet in teaching, there is no curriculum for the local languages. So it seems to imply, obviously, that academia has not kept pace with the trends because indigenous language media actually started around the early 2000s. Until then, it was always English language. It indicates serious, so this indicates a serious exclusion of indigenous language media in journalism education in Ghana. And because of it is now that I'm trying to lead a project into developing a curriculum that will start teaching indigenous language as a certificate and later roll onto a diploma or a BA. I'll talk about that later on. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So my name is Sisanda Nkoala. I'm based at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology. And I think I just want to start by giving a bit of context of how I came into the conversation. I'm a former journalist who became an academic. And my interest in language within journalism education stems from my experience in the field, where the sense was, even though the majority of South Africans do not speak English as their first language, the majority of news outlets in our country use English, and there's often a disconnect. And so I was interested when I started working in academia as to the role that education might play in changing that. So I'm really appreciative to be on this panel. Some context on the language situation in South Africa. We have 11 official languages on paper, because in high status contexts like newsrooms, like academia, like courts, the priority really is to English and Afrikaans. And our media industry reflects this because most of the outlets are in English and Afrikaans. Even in terms of the prestige that is given to particular outlets, you'd see, for example, journalism awards. What is good journalism is often ascribed to English or Afrikaans publications. And yet the majority of our audiences and even the interviewees are people who don't speak English. And also just from a political economy perspective, most funding is devoted to English and Afrikaans publications, even though indigenous language outlets by size of audiences, for example, with broadcasting, they often have much larger audiences, even in print. And I think the curriculum in terms of journalism reflects this. Most qualifications make English mandatory. So you would look at the score that a high school student has on English to determine whether they can make it into the program, along with other scores. And if they did an indigenous language, that is not looked at to the same degree. So, and even when they become journalism students, often students will be graded on grammar and spelling and being able to communicate proficiently in English without considering necessarily the languages they are competent in. There are some indigenous language courses. I know at CPUT and I think Rhodes, there was isiXhosa, which was taught taught, but it's sort of as an add-on where a student would be doing the media studies, media practice, and then they would have the indigenous language as sort of an add-on that they learn separately, which can often make it seem like, this is just like an elective. Our curriculum, I don't think, centers language to the degree that it should. And so I would say that our curriculum certainly reflects the sector, but not necessarily the audience that it speaks to. And as my fellow panelists pointed out, this is largely due to our history as a country. Our colonial past, our apartheid past really diminished the esteem of indigenous languages. And we see that reflected within journalism and journalism education, in my opinion.
Thank you. So I will just give you a little bit of context about Mauritius. Just like Ghana, we are a multilingual country. We have, but we do have those languages that we have inherited from the colonizers, because just for context, Mauritius was a French colony for a little under 100 years. So we have inherited the French language, and it's very, very prevalent in the country. And then after that, we became a British colony for 1.5 centuries. And English language has been, we've inherited the English language and it's in use in public administration and education, but not really in everyday conversation. I mean, as a tourist industry, a country, we do speak English with people who are incoming, but not on a daily basis. So, and the interesting thing is, during those two colonial periods, there was massive slave trade, massive numbers of slaves coming from the continent, from different countries on the continent, and then also subsequently indentured laborers from India. So at some point in time, those people had to be able to communicate, and this is how the hybrid language emerged, the Creole language, and which is French-based lexicon. Just to tell you how the French legacy on culture and language has remained quite strong. And incidentally, our Creole is intelligible to people from Seychelles, Martinique, Haiti, and even Louisiana, because it's French-based. And despite as I mentioned, 1968, we obtained our independence. Despite that, our education model has remained really British. We take exams at secondary school from University of Cambridge for school certificate, O-levels, and A-levels, a higher school certificate. So it's a very weird situation where people are educated in English, but they don't necessarily master it because they are not having conversations in English. And that sometimes creates a society which is a little bit fragmented, and those who are underprivileged don't have the cultural capital. It makes it difficult for them. On the other side, French language has dominated in the local literati, in the private corporate world, because the sugar barons came from the descendants of the French colonizers. And media organizations also have tended to really uphold French, the use of French language, both for peak time news bulletins on radio, television, even including state television, and also the written press. And conversely, the Creole language has for a long period of time been frowned upon, looked down upon, seen as not a proper language, more as a dialect, what we call a patois in French. And it tended to be associated with leftist political movements who would also publish activist media content in Creole. But the political leaders would conduct their meetings, the political meetings, rallies in Creole, because that's the language that makes sense to address people. And on radio stations, live talk shows tend to be in Creole. Just like you mentioned, interviewees will be in Creole, but the reportage, the commentary by the reporters will be in French, and no subtitling, of course. And also, of course, just like you mentioned, the awards, award-winning pieces would be not English, but French-based, right? So, but just to tell you that the language also has been really tied up with an intersection about identity politics in Mauritius, because initially in the history of Mauritius, it tended to be associated with descendants of slaves. So the Afro descendants, the Creole, who came to be known as Creole. But we have had debates also about who is a Creole and who is not a Creole, because there's this inversion of the term itself, the definition of the term that has happened over time. But in the 1980s, 1982 precisely, we had general elections, and there was a kind of leftist movement that won over elections. And there was this push to say, okay, we've got to use Creole language as unifying factor to guide our national identity. But unfortunately, it was short-lived because they lost very quickly. A lot of infighting. But what has resulted from it is that the law that governs broadcasting in Mauritius at that time was amended to make it mandatory to include broadcasting in languages that are not only English, French, but also Creole, Bhojpuri, and other Asian languages. But that wasn't put in implementation. It wasn't implemented until the 1990s, where some journalists said, why don't we do a summary in Creole at least? So, but it wasn't just one person kind of, or a few people were just a little bit crazy. But it was very, very popular, and people will look forward to it. We call it the résumé en créole, and it was flavorful, and people connected to it, and they understood the news much more clearly than if they would just listen to the French or English bulletin. 1999, we had a famous Creole singer who died in prison under police custody, and that sparked riots. And there was a very, very big debate about the malaise Creole. So, and some academics at the university decided that this is, we have to do something and accommodate, diversity, be more inclusive. And so they introduced modules on Creole language, and then subsequently a full-fledged course. So just, why am I saying this? Because what has happened is that in our journalism program, I've tried to introduce the Creole language. It has been difficult, has been a struggle. It started as an optional, additional elective module. I had proposed it to be a core module, but at least something. But it has been possible because of collaborations that we've had with the language department that worked on the official dictionary, which is its third edition, which counts 19,400 entries. So it's a very thick dictionary, which looks like the Oxford Dictionary. It looks very, very, and it's we have also a grammar, an official grammar and orthography, and it's this kind of shift away from the Creole language being just a battleground for the ideologues to becoming the purview of people who are experts in the science of language, linguists, sociolinguists, and also media academics now. That has kind of allowed us to occupy that kind of space. So it's just for the context. So let me move on to the second round of questions. Should we switch? Do you want to go next? Second round of question was if you do have local languages in your curriculum, how did you do it? Did you face any obstacles? If not, what do you think could be help you to get there? Do you feel it's important? Of course, I think it's you will be an advocate for that, right?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we do have by way of courses. That's what I'm aware of. So we'll have a course in an indigenous language as part of a journalism 3-year diploma or degree. I'm not aware of within media studies and within production that kind of inclusion of indigenous languages. And I think one of the main reasons is that there really perhaps isn't a deep understanding or an appreciation of why it is important to include indigenous languages in something like journalism studies. I think when students come and they want to be writers and they say they want to be a voice for the voiceless, because what they have seen is a certain kind of writer and a voice for the voiceless, we have not helped them imagine that actually this can happen in your language, and this should happen in your language because there are stories that cannot be told otherwise. I'm thinking recently of the coronation of the Zulu king, where there were developments, and this always happens in our context, where something culturally significant happens, but because we don't use the language to tell these stories, the significance is lost, and it just seems like another event. And our students also don't find themselves in our classroom, and if they don't find themselves, they can't leave and transform the field. So they basically leave and just regurgitate what it is that we've shown them. So I think the main challenges are not really appreciating. I also think there is, and this I think is across the board, most of us who are journalism educators are not educators by training. We have not done a degree in education. So understanding something like multilingual pedagogies, how do you use language creatively in your classroom when you are not a speaker of that language? We think we have to speak an indigenous language to include it in your curriculum, which is not the case. And yeah, I think it's also because we see it as optional. Where the lessons that I think we can learn from this is that the issue of language needs to really be emphasized as being more than just a means to an end. Currently, the view is that it's just to facilitate learning, when my view is the inclusion of multiple languages in our journalism curricula can actually change the curricula and achieve some of these calls to decolonize. I think of including texts, for example. We've got a corpus called the Early South African Black Texts, Black Press, which are old newspapers that were multilingual in nature, written by indigenous language speakers during the colonial period and the apartheid period. And if we had the interest and the means to dig deep, I believe we could unearth new forms or new ways of doing journalism in our context. But that needs for multilingualism to be seen more than just something to get through, and actually an imperative that can help us do what it is that we want to do in our field, which is really center African epistemologies. And we can't do that outside of language. So that is my response.
All right, so I've already indicated that there is serious exclusion of indigenous language media in journalism education in Ghana. So I only look at the obstacles in this respect. But before I do, I want to stress that including the local languages in journalism education in Ghana is very crucial, not just because of the dominance of indigenous language outlets in broadcasting, but more because concerns are raised everywhere in the country about the lack of standards and professionalism in the way the indigenous language professionals practice their craft. People believe that it is because most of them haven't been to journalism schools, they are not educated, and that is why they don't know how to apply ethics, apply professionalism in the course of doing journalistic work. The situation in Ghana is that those who report in the indigenous languages are employed not because of their certificate or anything like that. It's because of their natural fluency in the native languages, because they were born into it, and that is the only criteria sometimes used. And this happens when we have a lot of graduates, diploma, degree, without jobs in the country. Now, but why is indigenous language not included? That is the key question. Why is it that we haven't been able to include these in the curriculum in the journalism schools? The problem boils down to an inconsistent language policy in Ghana so far as education generally is concerned, before we even come to journalism education. In Ghana, the language policy has seen English being used as the medium of instruction from upper primary consistently. There were times it fluctuated. Sometimes government would say, okay, you should start from lower primary, sometimes they will jump. Interestingly, from 1957, when our first president, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, started, English was the medium of instruction from primary one or stage one all the way to the university. It was from 1973 that changes began occurring somewhere along the line, but consistently from upper primary, it is English and not the indigenous languages. So you can see how the overemphasis on English worked on the Ghanaian society and then downplayed all the indigenous languages to the extent that it lost its value and people attached status. So English became a status symbol and it is still the same up to today. So there are many Ghanaians, educated or not, who lack the opportunity, motivation to learn, and the ability to read and write their own languages. Interestingly, as I sit here, I can't write my own language, I can't read it. But I'm here speaking to you in English language, and that's what I have used all along. It's because of the system. And there are many colleagues like me who can speak English very well, but they cannot read, they cannot write their local languages. So the issue is, if you go to school, you want to go and do a local language, to do what? That's the feeling in the country. And this is something I think we have to change. So the capacity to teach the language in the general institutions is lacking. See, that is the key issue. Like my colleague has said, media and journalism departments lack qualified lecturers to teach local language journalism. And the departments are not also ready to employ people with that qualification to come in. We think this is a journalism department, a communication department. You need that qualification to come in and not something else. Let me skip a lot of things and then go to, then another critical thing is the fact that at the journalism department, when issues like this come up, lecturers and administrators are not fascinated by bringing in students to come and learn something they are not motivated to do, because generally students are not really keen on coming to learn the indigenous languages, to talk about learning aid for the purpose of broadcasting. They would rather go and then do that in the English medium where they think that they can go out there to perform. Now, I can also talk about the non-existence of teaching and learning materials, such as that's what we've been talking about today. I can tell you that I haven't seen any where someone has written anything about how to teach indigenous languages in journalism studies. So, and then the logistics, and now we are in the technological age, we're talking about digital platforms and so on. How are they going to do all these things in the local languages? For me, I think it is doable, but the issue of taking the first step has always been an issue and people don't want to try. Interestingly, there is a very popular radio station. In fact, the one with the highest readership anytime audience research is done. It's called Peace FM. It has networks all over the country in terms of affiliation. So primetime music is connected everywhere in Ghana. It even has outlets outside Ghana, America, UK, you won't believe it, and so on. Now, because of digitalization and the fact that newsrooms are trying to adapt to technology, so they are now also migrating onto online news. This radio station that is an Akan, a local language station, actually has its online news in English. I don't know whether I'm making the point. You see, this is a purely local language station, but its online portal, they have the news there in English. So it tells you the picture as we have, and it's a big challenge. So maybe when we get to the last part of the question, I can provide some examples as to how we can overcome this, but obviously we can begin to see that the solution is to, and it's not in the hands of journalism educators, for example, to apply a language policy that is in the hands of government. Government has to make a policy, for example, to make sure that the language is taught. I think in Kenya, unless I'm wrong, Prof is here, Kenya has done a great job, because by secondary school, from what I know, at least everybody who has been through the system can read and understand, or at least speak about 3 local languages, their own, I think Kiswahili, and then Kikuyu or Ruo, one of them. I mean, from what I hear, and I've come across quite many, and they can read it. And so you can see how they are easily able to shift in between these languages, no matter the platform, whether it is formal or not. Ghana is totally different. In our constitution, it is said that Parliament's main medium is English, but if somebody comes there and speaks the local language, there should be an interpreter. If there is no interpreter, then that cannot happen. So these are some of the challenges we have, and it feeds from the political space, the public space, into the classroom. Thank you.
Thank you. So, so as I was saying, in our course at the university, at undergraduate course, we have introduced last year, I've introduced last year, an additional elective module, which I had proposed as a core, and then it became an additional elective. And then, but there has been reluctance from the internally, not so much institutionally, but not confronted in overt reluctance. Because I think, and it's a natural also attitude, I think I've been there myself in terms of the occasional criticism that this is just a distraction, it's not going to serve any purpose to learn the language. And the fact is that the majority of students last year chose that additional elective, despite the fact that this represented additional work for them. So this has really helped us, encouraged us to support inclusion of the local language. And in fact, I'm currently working on a postgraduate diploma, which will be offered with an industry partner. And now I have proposed the module as a core, and there has been no reluctance, no resistance whatsoever now. So it's not yet offered, it's still being accredited and all the administrative procedures. And maybe one thing that has helped is that, as I mentioned, we have this collaboration with the language department, and more precisely, with a team headed by the author of the Mauritian dictionary, so Professor Corporan. And I'm also on board the team that is producing that dictionary. And also another dictionary that we produce for the Rodrigan Creole, a small island which is part of the Republic of Mauritius, where the language is similar, appears to be similar, but there are specificities. And we did scientific work on the language to show that it has specificities. And so it hasn't been easy, but I think we've been lucky. We have this combination. And as you mentioned, also the state recognition is really important. It also, I think, comes back to people who have the grit to drive this and to find allies in different departments, and also to be able to work within the system itself. And not be, our approach is not confrontation, but our approach is more scientific validation, showing that it works and not forcing it upon people, making it optional. And then the others, they just, as we say in French, I don't know how to translate, other people will run to help victory. So, and the fact that the state has recognized a dictionary, has an official grammar, put together an academy as well, just like the French Academy, Though at some point in time it was dormant, so we had to really push again for it to be revived. And at the same time, the state has an ambivalent kind of position towards us. Like, okay, let them do their thing. If it works, okay, we'll gain something from it. But we're not really that convinced because they don't necessarily themselves use the grammar properly, etc. So, and we've used this by putting up together projects about institutional recognition. For example, we just got funding for a project on use of Creole in public institutions, including in Parliament. So this is going to be very, very difficult project. And then also we've created external demand. We've encouraged external demand. So we've created a short course on Mauritian Creole for media and communication professionals. And also the fact that the branding experts out there are themselves saying, okay, but this is the language that people understand. And it also, demarcates them from other brands saying, we connect to our identity. So it's become fashionable. I don't know. We hope it's going to be not short-lived, but long-term. So there is this kind of vision that also it's not about replacing English or French. It's in addition to, it's not subtracting, it's diversifying, it's broadening democracy, it's being more inclusive. So if you want to speak in French, fine. If you want to speak in English, fine. If you want to speak in Creole, you should be able to, because that's the language that 85%, more than 85% of Mauritians in the last census say that this is the language that they speak at home. So that's basically how this has happened. So just the last round of questions, I think it will be a bit shorter. So given what we are doing, what more can we do? What is the way forward? How do you see the evolution of journalism education with respect to this topic of decoloniality and language policy, linked to research? You want to expand a bit on that?
Yeah, I think, your last point is really key, that it's not calling for English to go, Afrikaans, it's calling for the inclusion and really democratizing just students' experience in our journalism classrooms. And I think also the first speaker mentioned around the need to think about this from an entire society approach. It's not within the hands of journalism educators to change how language is used, but I do think in our classrooms and in our lecture rooms, we do have some measure of power which we can use to effect change. South Africa does have a multilingual higher education policy, a framework in place, which really should be driving the use of multiple languages, but we're not seeing that translate necessarily to the degree that it should in practice. So if we talk about what can be done, I'll speak just practically from some research that I've done on some strategies that journalism educators might want to incorporate. And the first is making Indigenous languages present in your classrooms through something like code switching or translanguaging where possible. So just, and this speaks to a notion that is called the culture of communication, where how people use language in a space makes people feel welcome or not welcome, makes them feel part of that culture or excluded from that culture. And if your students don't hear isiXhosa, Sesotho, whatever languages they speak in our classrooms, they come to associate this space as not being welcoming to those languages. So translanguaging, code switching, I think welcoming that if you are not competent in Indigenous languages, allowing students to take charge and bring languages in through group work or through presentations that incorporate different languages. Another strategy that has worked for me is the inclusion of multiple languages in assessment. So what I do is I let my students submit other than essays, because I haven't quite figured that yet, but all other assignments in whatever language they want to submit, and it's usually English, Afrikaans, Xhosa, and maybe Sesotho. And institutions have got translators who can translate for you. So where you don't understand what is being said, you can bring those in and then use their expertise to understand. And just that permission as well, I think frees students up. I remember in a study that I did with my students, one of them said that even though I have given them permission to use language in this way, they don't feel like it's welcome in higher education. There's this sense that they won't sound smart if they hand in assignments in Xhosa. That was in first year. By third year, this person was handing in really brilliant projects because it was something that she'd been exposed to over the course of her studies. And then I think somebody has spoken about the development of materials. So we need a concerted effort to develop journalistic content in Indigenous languages that we can use. And then lastly, I think we need an interdisciplinary approach. Like I said, most of us are not educators, most of us are not linguists, and it's not something we can do in and of ourselves. So incorporating colleagues in African language studies, in education, to help us understand multilingual pedagogies, I think will move us forward. Then finally, in respect to the evolution of journalism education with respect to decoloniality and language policy, I am convinced that we really cannot decolonize journalism or any other field without centering language, the indigenous language of the people. There was a quote that I was looking for from Ngugi, who said, "Language as culture is the collective memory bank of a people's experience in history. And if we want people to be able to tell the kinds of stories we need them to and articulate themselves in the ways we need them to in our context, we definitely need to center language more." So one of my dreams is to have like an inter-institutional project that takes texts from the early South African Black press and takes them as they are to research how journalism that is multilingual is understood. So those texts exist. We speak about them, but we don't actually use them for research. So that kind of project, I think, would definitely move us forward in terms of language and in terms of decoloniality in the South African context. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think the way forward, we should start having conversations or continue deepening conversations around running programs, curriculum in Indigenous language journalism in our schools. Something like we are having over here consistently will work. I also think that creative and innovative means, if I'm speaking specific to Ghana, partnerships with other institutions or experts in Indigenous language could be sought and applied, because the crucial issue is about the lack of capacity, no experts to handle that aspect in the department. So we can do collaborations. Interestingly, about 2 months ago, I began thinking in this way. So I sought permission from our rector and started a partnership with a sister faculty from a different university. They have a faculty that teaches some of the Indigenous languages. So I'm in partnership with them, and we are currently developing a curriculum, first and foremost, to start running a certificate program in Indigenous language media. We hope to build that into a diploma and then move on from there. It's a bit technical in the sense that these are people who cannot even write it. So they shouldn't be at the Ghana Institute of Journalism in the first place. They should be at Ejumako, where I got the experts from to come and support. Because now they will have to be taught even from the basics, the alphabet system, how to write, the grammar of the local language and all this. So I know how daunting the task is, but the important thing is that we have started something. And I think that an initiative like this can be taken up. UNESCO has been, and other institutions, international organizations have been supporting journalism education across the country. For example, we have the UNESCO model for journalism education, which institutions all over the country, the continent can apply. What we have started can be supported by organizations so that we can have a model curriculum for indigenous language, media, education, let's say in Africa. In that case, countries can tap into that and then roll out education in the area. I'll look at the issue of the centrality of language in decoloniality. In fact, from the keynote speaker, and I keep repeating, the issue has been how we can ground our own knowledge, our studies within an organic African environment, where what we teach in terms of our epistemology, it speaks directly to our needs and our aspirations. And if we want to do that, it is a kind of cultural revival, if I may use that term. Now, language is what carries the culture, the aspirations, and everything of our people. And so beginning to do this in our indigenous language and let our journalists, our media people communicate to our people also in the language they understand is key to this issue of decoloniality. And as academics, I think we should start distinguishing between decolonization and then decoloniality. These are two different concepts. From independence, we have been trying to decolonize, you see, by trying to keep out the negative influences that colonization brought to us. We are still in the process, as we have seen today in our textbooks, in our teaching models. When in my country, people develop academics or departments develop programs, the next thing someone will ask is, where else have you found it? Liverpool University. That is what we do. We don't even talk about Aga Khan, for example, to say, oh, they are running a program like that, or go to Tanzania, elsewhere. We are always looking elsewhere. It's part of this, the problem that we have. So I think that if we want to, decoloniality is a way of understanding, a way of awareness that should move us to do what we have to do, to root what we are doing within the epistemologies of our own selves, you see. And that is where I find language very key. And so in summing up, our research and everything should feed into this consciousness that we do research because we want to enrich knowledge creation. We want to enrich skills that feed into doing something that will immediately impact on our own environment, not necessarily because of elsewhere. And I agree with my two colleagues here. It's not about cutting ourselves from the international community. So what I'm saying should touch base with internationalization as well. How do we do it in such a way that we don't disadvantage ourselves? That is the key thing we have to look at. Thank you.
Thank you. So I don't think I have much to add. I really agree with my colleagues here about this need for developing indigenous material, having interdisciplinary approach. I really like the quote that you cited, language being the memory bank of people's history and culture. So, and I think the challenge now is going beyond, even if we are doing our decolonizing internally within our country, but how do we share our experiences so that we can learn from the lessons, from the difficulties we have faced, and how we can maybe pull together our resources. Of course, that also creates challenges of intercomprehension. But again, I think my husband tends to say, it's not about, he's an IT person, he says it's not about hardware, it's not about software, it's about peopleware. And really, I've learned that the hard way. It's who you have around you, who are your allies. But having said that, those who are resisting or opposing, at some point in time, we have to get them also on board. Otherwise, it will not happen on the scale that we want it to happen, and make it something which is relaxed as well, and also fun for our students, for our media people, so that it's not seen as just, you know, the whim of an academic elite that wants to hold discourses about decolonialization and decoloniality and all those grand words. So that's just what I wanted to say. And I think we can close the panel and open up to questions. I can see Jean raising her hands first. So go ahead, Jean.
Thank you, Christine. Yeah, just listening to the discussion there, and my mind was going to other forms of media, not just journalism. We are seeing over the past 2 decades an increase in vernacular media, production of films, different types of films in our African countries in the vernacular, and they're very popular. You find they're very popular. So I think that speaks for itself, that there is an audience for this. And also, I think we sometimes focus too much on print media. With radio, I know definitely from Zimbabwe side, we have not had representation from our colleague who was supposed to come from Zimbabwe was mugged on his way to the airport. So that was very sad. In Zimbabwe, radio communication, vernacular is the way to reach those corners of the country that you cannot reach any other way. And it is very, very popular, the best way. And you find it's usually the African ruling parties who understand this dynamic and take full advantage of it. And we miss it in our own teaching and other forums, that vernacular local languages are very effective means of communication. Certainly for radio, it works. It has worked as well in media, entertainment media. So just wanted to throw that in there. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let's just maybe take 2 questions on the floor, and then we switch to online, and then we'll come back to the floor. So yes, I'm sorry. I don't.
Thanks, guys. That was really interesting, especially for me. I come from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. And there have been some interesting developments over the years. One of the first things that happened about a decade and a half ago, and 2 vice chancellors back, was that they threw out Afrikaans as a language, and they threw out all foreign languages, except French. French remain. Then there has been a tremendous push for Isizulu to be incorporated into the curriculum, into teaching, and so on. So there is an entire department now that is devoted to translation, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. But it's a concerted effort. They are developing an academic discourse that postgraduate students in particular will have access to. If you want a particular reading, you put some audio up and send it off to somebody and hope that it will come back. One on my list is that I'm not sure that significance is always lost in translation. But that's a debate for another day. And the other thing that UKZN has done is introduce a few years back a compulsory Zulu module for people who did not have Zulu as a first language. So if you go there, and it doesn't matter whether you're from another African country either, you still have to do this introductory Zulu module. And the long-term institutional hope is that the university will be completely multilingual, not necessarily bilingual. They have, French has been incredibly successful, which is kind of an interest with, they have huge links with Madagascar, our French department. So a lot of funding has gone into that, seems to be a lot of development. And I have Nadine, who's one of the student champions, has just been to Ireland. Because of course, there is, it was a disparate language, and they're trying to spread it back in their studies involved. So those are the positive things about this. I'm not going to mention any of the negative ones because I'm a nice person. What I was going to say is that one of the things that worries me and it would have been a question for you. If you've got, what did you say, a huge amount of languages, so then how do you choose which one you're going to put into your particular curriculum? And this would also be with my institution, I suppose it's a bit negative, but if we're going to concentrate on one particular African language, and we are bringing back, by the way, all the other foreign languages, so coming back Spanish and being reinstituted, because they realized it was a mistake. In fact, only one that's not making a comeback is Afrikaans. And would Afrikaans count as an indigenous language? Not that. It doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. Another debate for another day. Yeah, but how do you choose? So if UKZN becomes Zulu University, then do we have to have another 10 universities which each choose a particular language to operate it? And once you start doing that, particularly in a country that is as potentially fractious as South Africa, is that not quite a separatist thing to do? So, no, you can't go to Stellenbosch because only the Afrikaans scholars go there. No, you can't go to UCT because that's the way we keep it English. You can go to UKZN, which is Zulu, it's what was it?
It shows the situation.
Yeah.
As
But it hasn't actually done anything with it. We actually make people encouraging people to, and it's great because we've got it. So that's the one thing. The other thing that's not so nice with UK in the Sisanda story is because of this huge rollout all over the university and for undergraduates. They have stopped the teaching of isiZulu as a major second language. And that is very sad because there's some leading South African scholars who are obviously quite old now, who never meant to study Zulu in the first place, went to university, majored in it, and then carried on and ended up being distinguished scholars. And so that's another potential problem. Yeah, and I think I'll just stop there.
Okay, maybe what we do, we can listen to another question or comment and then you can answer it. Want to go? Yeah, Theodore?
All right, so as the discussions or your presentations were going on, a lot of questions started running through my mind, and the question of even an indigenous media organization like the Peace FM that Modestus talks about, and them writing their online news stories in English. In fact, there is an anecdotal evidence that even the news that they read, it is written in English.
Yeah.
So their fluency in Tree language, so as they are reading the English language, they sort of translate. And they are very fluent with the language, and they use sort of flowery words, which is very attractive to, somehow has become attractive to the audiences. So they are using these, this style of journalism, and people are attracted to it. But then we also know that years ago, so a particular journalist from one of such media organizations attended or took a course, our MA course. And when he came for the interview, one of the professors in the department said that we hope that when we grant you the admission, you're going to make a difference in that space. And the difference here being the ethics and the standardization of things in the newsroom. And over a period of time, this professor monitored, what he was doing in that space and realized that there was an improvement. So it tells us that if we open our doors to those who are practicing in that space, we are going to make some form of impact. So that brings us to the question of who are we training, or who are the targets of our training? So it's not just people who want to be journalists, but journalists, practicing journalists that are in a particular space like the indigenous media spaces. And it is very important that we attract them, because our course contents may not be that attractive. We don't have a lot of them coming to take courses in the various journalism departments. Then there is also the question of capacity. And in terms of capacity, recently the department had an experience that I want to share. So there is another university that is affiliated to our department. And they usually would bring their examination questions for moderation. And so there are all the courses. And this particular university has one indigenous language, Twi, which is dominantly spoken in Ghana, as one of the courses they offer. Nobody in the department was able to assess that particular one. So we had to take it to the linguistics department. And in that department, they had issues with the questions because they thought they were also not standard. So how, the way we speak is different from how the written, language. So they also had issues. So we are thinking of, so the one teaching that course, how much capacity does that person have? So these are things that we should be thinking about, even as we try to bring some of these things into the curriculum. And I'm also thinking, if you are talking about language, is it just the grammar? Is it just, could we think about it in another way, where it's not just the language, but we are looking at how you practice as a journalist and put it in the context of, even though you are in this indigenous media space, you still have to comply with certain norms, certain practices and all of that. I'm just thinking, and in an MA program like we have, how do you accommodate language, 18-month program? How do you accommodate an indigenous language in an 18-month program? I don't know whether there are some experiences to share, because we open our doors to people from diverse backgrounds, undergraduates, people with undergraduate degrees from diverse backgrounds. So they come in for an 18-month program. I'm wondering how you could begin, a language course, not forgetting the fact that the students are already they have to do a number of courses that actually impacts them, in terms of their capacity to even take on all those courses that we are offering them already. Thank you.
Thank you. So I will allow Modestus to answer the question about how do you choose, and if you want to comment also about what your colleague said, and then.
Well, that's a critical question. Which one do we choose? In answering that, I'll say what comes before that is even identifying a national language within the framework of the many languages that are there. In Ghana, and I've seen something about Nigeria too, that's why up till now, English still remains the official language, because of the idea that it is the language that rather brings us together, rather than choosing one language that can then divide people. You see, so, but it is doable to some extent. For example, I know that in South Africa, you have 11, is it national languages? I read somewhere 11 out of the many. How did you come by choosing 11 and leaving out others? So that's the starting point. In Ghana, the Ghana Broadcasting Corporation has, along the line, provided news in some of our local languages. Sometimes around 1943, before independence, we had about 1949, sorry, about 15 indigenous languages were used. Then after independence, it began to fluctuate, sometimes 5, sometimes 3, sometimes 6. Currently, there are 6 languages that GBC broadcasts in as news. We haven't had any issues yet about that. One of the languages, as I keep saying, the Akan, has about almost half the population having that as their native language. Now, if we look at those who speak it as either native or second language or third language, we are looking at about 80 to 85% of the population. So that is why PCFM can connect to all parts of the country, and people embrace it and they listen to that station. And so if you ask me as an individual, it's very easy to choose it as a national language, moving on to become even official language, in spite of the sentimental attachment that people have to the small languages. But I tell you, if the matter comes up, there will be a whole lot of things in the country, even though I keep telling people that sometimes the language will choose you to speak it by itself. If you pick a plane, you arrive at our airport, Kotoka International Airport, the first sign you see there is Akwaba. That's the only thing that has been there for ages. Akwaba is in Akan. No one is complaining about it. Anytime people speak English and they want to give a proverb in Ghana, this is very practical. A proverb in a local language to spice the English. It is Akan they use. Others and other ethnic groups who have their own language, they'll come and use Akan when they have to code switch and then say something in a local language. So the trend is there, but the will, the political will, and the fact that people are still thinking about, well, if you want to unduly promote this language, you are then killing other languages. And I agree, every language has the right to live and be spoken by those who own and speak the language. So what we have done is that in the curriculum, we are able to identify experts in Akan who were willing to come and work with us. And then I'll feed that into the question she asked about. It's not just the grammar of the language and so on, but people who have knowledge in the language as well as in the media journalism space. So maybe I don't have to mention a name. There is this woman at Ajimako who is on GBC and other Dr. Wiafia Kenten. I don't know whether, yes, she's one of those we are working with. She's already in the media. And so far, she's the only Ghanaian, if I'm not mistaken, who has taken Akan up to the PhD level and wrote the PhD in that language, not in English. All others will write their thesis in English, even though they are studying aspects of the local language. And she's also in the media. So she's the one leading the team. And so we are taking care of that. Our objective is that let's build capacity in Akan for now. Once we have something, then we can begin to look for other languages. We plan to go into another language called Ga. Ga is the language of Accra, the capital of Ghana. So we can go into that too, because there is a radio station, Obonu FM, which broadcasts exclusively in that language. So we can make room for that. And then another key language, we can make room as we progress. So that is how theoretically we hope to tackle this. Of course, we can't do this in all the languages in the country. And I hope that the way we have come to accept Akan by implication, and then the way we've accepted GBC, selecting some and broadcasting them without any issues, we hope that we can have that goodwill and then provide within the next 10 years, when we start, we can provide up to about 4 additional languages in the curriculum. Thank you.
So because I think we have only 5 minutes left, what I would ask, if you could show the questions which are online, and I can allow you to answer in the meantime as well, Sisanda. Okay, just so we can, you can go ahead.
I can't read it, but I just wanted to speak to the comment that was made around the increase in African or in indigenous language media from an entertainment perspective. And I think it attests to the fact that there is an audience for African language media, whether it is news media or entertainment media. What isn't there is the funding. So advertisers do not devote funds to these mediums, and as such, they're not getting the kind of priority that they need to. In terms of choosing, I don't think you need to choose. I think using multilingual pedagogies really is an act of decolonizing in your classroom, because it removes you as the lecturer and the institution as the knower and this person who must have all the information or all the languages. And you invite your students who speak languages to create and co-create knowledge with you. So in a classroom with 11 languages, if there's somebody there who speaks the language, that language is welcome. Institutions, though, have policies. And as my awareness is that there are, I think, around 3 languages in each institution. At CPUT, it's English, it's Xhosa and Afrikaans, and UKZN would have its policy. And that's an institutional issue that is around translating signage, etc. But in your classroom, as long as you've got speakers of a language, you can use it as an act of decolonizing by saying, because I don't know this language, I can open the space up to my students to help co-create with me. And then lastly, the issue of capacity. I think as long as we try and do it alone, we're not going to have capacity. So if journalism institutions or departments leave multilingualism just to us, we're not going to be able to. So what you did, I think, is a step, including a department that specializes in that language. And it's not going to work the first time. But as you do this work, interdisciplinary or even interinstitutional, it will work. We're not the first continent to try and be multilingual, right? There are other countries that teach multilingually. I think with us, it's really a mind shift that this is not optional, as we have made it to be. Our students need and our society needs for journalism to be multilingual, and we can be a starting point.
Thank you. I think there was a comment online about making the curriculum less rigid and more responsive to research. And I think you already addressed that. And I totally agree with you. To come back to this question of which language do we choose, just to tell you about the Mauritian context, the media, they actually don't have to specialize in one language. What they do is, for example, radio stations, they will have a news bulletin in French, which is the main one, the one which is the peak time. Then you will have bulletin in English, and then you will have a bulletin in Creole. So it's more of a segmentation and everybody finding their space, including other ancestral languages like Hindi, Bhojpuri, Chinese languages, etc. So, but what we have seen is much more visibility for the Creole language, which is the only language which has been created on the island, because we didn't have any people on the island before the colonizers settled in. And therefore, this is the only language which is not, has been created together, despite our ethnic differences, despite our, issues in terms of at some point in time the language being associated with a particular community. But now it's the work that we're doing is about really making sure this is more about the national identity. And I do agree about this being able to experiment, and if it works, it works. At least we will have tried, right? So I think this will be the end of the panel, and there are many other aspects I wanted to touch upon, like moderation online. This is also another very burning question, but I think we can stop here and continue the conversation on other platforms. I would just like to seize the opportunity to thank Professor Franz Kruger, Dinesh, Jean for the organizing this wonderful meeting. I think it's really a very good start to this network, and I hope we can all have ideas for collaborating across our countries and across disciplines as well, as we mentioned. So thank you again to you.
Great, thanks so much. I think that was a very rich discussion and very thoughtful discussion, I think, about some important issues. Please just stay where you are. We've got about 45 minutes or so before our transport, and an opportunity to pick up exactly where you left us, Christine. Which is, what do we do with this? What do we do with this group, with this network? You want to do that now? Well, people can give a moment's thought to my question, and while you address your logistics. So go ahead.
Just to share, this morning, last night I had sent an email communicating that we'd leave from here straight to dinner, but we've been excellent with our time. And so we'll be leaving from here back to the hotel, so you can leave your packages, computers and all. And if you need to change and wear something warmer, there's space to do that. So we will be going back to the hotel and be able to leave our precious goods and go light for the dinner. Thank you.
That's it. So talk to me. What are we going to do? What do you want to do? Do you want to create an institution? Do you want to, what sort of the shape of it? What kind of projects? What kind of collaboration? What do you want to do? Modestus.
Yes, I think this platform has.
Please don't all disappear right at this moment, because this is the business end of the day. Yeah.
Yes, I think today's meeting has shown that there are a lot of common things that we share, irrespective of where we have come from and the institutions that we are in and what we do over there. So I will like that and propose accordingly that we have this standing committee to identify some common themes that we can start working with, sharing ideas, and then have a goal that will work for us in our various institutions. If anything at all, the networking alone is great. So we can have, how do we call that? The platform, a community-based virtual platform where we can come in, raise issues, share ideas, discuss and have consensus towards something. We have to have something tangible to show. We can give ourselves some time frame to say that by this time we should be able to do ABC. And if possible, we should be able to even come up with research, have groups within, and write something that will serve our institutions in terms of how we move on with journalism education on the continent. This is something small I want to share for starters. Thank you.
Okay.
I think just adding on to that, I think with how the panels were constituted, perhaps we could look at some kind of publications based on these themes. Maybe Professor Kruger can pitch for a special issue of a journal, or we can pitch for a special issue of a journal, like some of the ones that were mentioned. And the theme can be around this broad theme, and obviously it would include some of the panels, but also open, maybe if there are people who couldn't make it and who have this kind of work that they are doing. I think that could be a way forward. I also think through the networking to see how we can invite other people to our classrooms to maybe come and talk about some of the work that they're doing, or not even to our classroom, maybe to our classrooms or to our institutions. I think, for example, this conversation around an indigenous language media as a course, I think is something that would be quite interesting to present and to think through at a curriculum development level, which often lecturers don't have full control over. So those would be two suggestions from me.
Yes, down the side. Margaret and then Jessica.
Yes, I just want to come back to you, France, to guide us about the African Journalism Educators Network. Are we established? Are we registered? And what do we want to form a network which can maybe expand by, having sort of membership, having activities that rotate around membership, and then we recruit more journalism educators, because I'm sure there are journalism educators out there who do not know about the existence of this network. So perhaps if you'd throw more light on that. And for me, when I saw this as a topic of discussion, I actually thought along the lines of how do we become a bigger network? How do we expand membership? Do we, for example, need to pay membership fees, annual membership fees? What are the activities that we can, list to be doing like on an annual basis? Thank you very much.
Well, let me respond directly and then I'll give you a chance, Jessica. So there is no registered entity called a GEN. I mean, a GEN is the people in this room. It's a newsletter, it's a logo, it's a mailing list. And I mean, my personal preference, I think, is to grow it in that form. I think that if you go too quickly to formalize a structure, you're in for costs and admin and stuff. And I'm not sure we have the resources for that. I mean, it may come in time. I mean, Lynn Morris this morning said, no, we should do that. And, that's part of the discussion here, right? Is how formal do we want to be? I mean, I've had experience of other initiatives of this kind that have funding for a while and they start and there's a big this and that. And then when the funding is no longer there, then it's kind of at an end. But that's just my preference. And, I think it's part of the discussion here is how formal do we want to be? Yeah. Jessica, and then
Okay, I'll just agree with what Dr. said, maybe inviting other journalism educators to go to other newsrooms, because when I was listening to your panel discussion, it came to my attention that the entire education system in Namibia has to be reworked, because you are exempted from English when you apply for the journalism program. So you don't have any English modules at all. The only time we have access to English is in upper primary. From the 1st grade to the 7th, you are taught in vernacular languages. So the only time you have access to English is from the 8th to the 12th grade. And then when you come to varsity, you are exempted from all English courses. So basically, this whole entire scenario of bringing in vernacular languages into our classrooms will be very difficult because already we don't have English. So maybe if you guys can collaborate on that and speak to our journalism educators from the 2 universities, mainly University of Namibia and the Namibia University of Health and Applied Science. I think this is very essential to our media industry in Namibia. Thank you.
Thanks. Did you have your hand up?
I did.
And then Nancy, yeah.
Sorry.
No, go ahead. And then Nancy.
I did.
Do you want to put on your mic? Because we do still have people on the line.
Sorry, I did have a suggestion and a question more. If the structure or the setup was to be formalized, what would be the advantages of that? If it stays as it is, what are the disadvantages? I think I'm not sure if this was discussed when I was outside before. Is there anything that is deficit with this setup as it is, that there is a need for the formalization of it? If it gets formalized, what is the imagination of what, this setup would articulate itself in the future before any other decision is taken, I think.
Well, I mean, I suppose I should qualify a little bit and say it depends, you know, things can be more or less formal. And I do think, I mean, one of the things that I hoped for today was for us to elect a small steering committee, right? Just a small group of people, hopefully from, you know, different parts of the continent who can, you know, talk to each other online from time to time and coordinate. And that's a step of more formality. The advantage of greater formality is, I suppose, ultimately you can probably do more, right? But it does take a lot of work and resources, particularly if we're as multinational as we would like to be. Because we then have to decide if we incorporate, for instance, an NGO, right? Organization. We would have to have a constitution, there's legal advice, it's got to be registered in South Africa or perhaps in Kenya or somewhere. You know, there's all of that stuff that has to happen. And yeah, I mean, right now, the money that we've got is part of a funding cycle, which is ending next March, through our membership of the with FOIO of the Charm Initiative. I mean, there may be money after that, we don't know. Yeah, so, I mean, I suppose the question is not, I mean, not so much just whether formal or not, it's what kind of formality, you know, do you draw up a statement of intent, a mission, do you have formal membership? You know, that would be a big thing, because again, it's got to be administered. Yeah, Nancy.
So, I'm thinking that, you know, the current setup hasn't, we haven't come of age to get into a formal arrangement. I think we're pretty young, and I think we, and these are my views, that we need to network more amongst ourselves, but, you know, start telling people about the existence of, you know, this group. And that is drawn from just thinking about how groups form and coalesce in an African setup. You know, we rarely start with formalities. It is a group that comes together either with a common agenda, and we sit around a table, and then the group grows. And I say this because I have seen and have been part of, you know, the formation of net associations, and they pick up very fast. They have the momentum in the first 2-3 years, and then nothing happens. So if we build a strong network amongst the team that is here, of course, you know, inviting people from time to time, and then form a strong network that can then, you know, form whatever formal association or arrangement we have. Maybe we are moving ahead of ourselves, and I say that because many of us are members of some of those associations, and sometimes when you're in a very big group, there are voices that don't get heard. And I think one of the things that I like about this particular group is how intimate the conversations are and the networking, even when we've had the virtual meetings. So perhaps we give ourselves a timeline and say we catch up again in a year and see what that looks like. And maybe then it will be time for us to start thinking about how formal we want to get. Yeah, those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Can we just see what's online by way of a Q&A, whether there's a, so there are speaking straight. Oh, okay, sorry. There's always agreeing with Margaret, which I think was just mainly about information. So I think picking up from what you're saying, I mean, I think we simply are a network, right? We will try to get together in a year's time or thereabouts. I mean, I say try because it will depend on money. I'm certainly happy to try and work on that. I think I think it would be very helpful for us to invite people, particularly to subscribe to the newsletter and to distribute that, because I think that's the core of what we're doing at the moment, and it keeps us in touch. So, I would ask you not only to ask people to subscribe, but also to engage on social media and so on. I think it would be helpful to elect a small steering committee, just a couple of people, 4 or 5 maybe, who can just meet once in a while to I suppose, put their names to perhaps proposals, to get a sense of what the issues are, to plan for next year, etc., etc. Would that be something that you would be comfortable with? John? Just to your mic.
Okay. I actually think that is very okay. We can constitute a small committee to help you and the skeleton staff to steer this particular organization or association. At the same time, I wanted to propose that in the meantime, between now and probably next year, we can also use this association to share opportunities or network, to share opportunities amongst ourselves. For example, funding opportunities, scholarships, do research together, as some members have said, and also recommend one another. By doing so, we shall be building our individual departments and schools back home, but also building this. And members will feel like they are getting something, and so they are much attached to the network. Yeah.
Okay. No, I think, I think just the fact that we've met each other is already an advantage, right? And, people are obviously free to call each other to say, I mean, as I think you were suggesting, come and talk to a group about, language instruction or whatever else it is. Okay, I want to talk about projects in a second, but who wants to help coordinate? Or
say something about, I totally understand about the difficulties of formalizing the structure. Maybe you could give us an indication of, in the current state of the structure, informal structure, what's the timeline in terms of funding that we currently have, so that maybe then when we come to that bridge, we'll have to cross it. So maybe a little bit before, then we can rediscuss how whether it needs to be formal. And I totally support the idea of having a committee who can help out, because I totally understand this can be very taxing on top of your other duties as well. And I think that the idea of publishing something would probably help us gain the visibility and support eventually more funding, whether it's for the formal structure or informal structure or into something more formal. So,
yeah. So the timeline, the current funding that we have runs until March. So, I mean, given how these things work, we would probably need fairly soon to try and fundraise. Of course, not everything needs funding, right? I mean, if we do a special edition, it's kind of part of our work anyway. And I mean, people will take it up or they won't, and we'll see what comes out of that. And I'm certainly happy to pursue that. But certainly a meeting like this costs a chunk of money. And there are other projects that we could think about. So that's just indirect answer to your question about timeline. So Who wants to assist with this undertaking? Spirit?
It's more a comment, Prof. Sorry. And I hope it's not.
What this would entail, what would you
Well,
expect?
I think we would meet online every now and again, maybe once in 2 months or so. I mean, it's not going to be this thing can grow enormously, but I think baby steps, I think we've got a newsletter, which I think we need to refine and keep going. I think it would be nice to undertake 1 or 2 projects. A special edition might be one. There might be 1 or 2 others, and then we'll see how it goes. You know what I mean? I mean, I've also got lots of stuff to do, so yeah, it can't be a full-time occupation. Sorry, Spiwa, you had a question?
So, Prof, I was just asking quickly if it's institution-based.
Well, that's an important question. I mean, so far we've dealt with it kind of individually rather than institution-based. I mean, partly the reason for that is that we can decide individually to belong to or join or work with other people. But if an institution has to join, then there's like a whole lot of bureaucracy. But I'm open to suggestions, I mean, if people want this to be an alliance of university or other journalism schools, then, let's talk about that. But I think for now, individually is easier, to be frank. It's late in the afternoon. Volunteers are few. Modestus is volunteering. Okay, and Sisanda is volunteering. We need somebody East Africa. Nancy, that would be fantastic. Okay. I'm cautious of overloading us with South Africans, to be frank. No offense, Musa. You can lurk. And if, if others want, I mean, we can decide how many people we want, But let's start there. And if anybody has, has an interest, please do just drop me a mail, you know where I am. Last question, projects, things we can do. I've got a couple of ideas, but I'd really like to hear other ideas. Nancy?
So one of the things that I think we can do is, I don't know how to organize it, but I think we really need to have an open discussion with players in the industry, so that we are not speaking to ourselves, we're not training for ourselves. It would be nice, to organize such a forum with industry leaders, but also journalists, just to hear from their end, what's the quality of journalism training and how is it supporting the work that they do.
A conversation continent-wide.
Yeah.
Okay, nothing short, nothing if not ambitious.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And it doesn't have to be a big group. It can be a group of a similar number.
Yeah.
But I think that conversation is necessary.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's an ongoing conversation, isn't it? I mean, we need to keep hearing.
Yeah.
We need to keep hearing.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
So I think that we can do regional or continental studies because of this network of members. It's not easy to come across a network that has got representatives from different parts of the continent to do a study. So this makes it very simple for us to do it.
Sure. Sure. On various topics,
various topics.
So, I mean, Enoch is busy with a climate change reporting project that could be extended to other countries if there is interest. Yeah. And of course, that's up to people, right? You've got You've got contact emails. You can put it out there. We can do a mailing list quite easily of the people here and grow that. And you can put it out there. I saw Alan and then Basil.
Thanks, Vance. Just a quick thing after what Nancy said is the usefulness of this kind of network is what it gives people, the value, and how it would differentiate from other networks set up for journalism educators. And it occurred to me when you said about the industry that maybe you want to think about the extent you open it up to other people. So it's not just educators, but it's a space where people of the industry, of course you have to find the right kind of person, but they're permanently part of this get together.
Yeah, that's a really useful point, actually. And, if we're open-ended as we are, I mean, there's, we don't have membership criteria. If you're interested, you're in, kind of thing. I mean, that's fine. Basil.
To continue maybe from John's contribution about what we could do. I mean, we are educators, and one of the things that we probably established is that we may not have instructional materials. I mean, if you look at the list of books that we submitted, they probably do not speak to our contexts, and maybe that's one of the issues we should try and cure. Perhaps a book drive, in certain areas. Maybe the first one could be about, issues that we discussed today. I think from our discussion, there's a lot of information that came out through this from these panels that we could maybe even start with by trying to bring out different perspectives about the way we teach journalism and media in Africa, and some concepts that we need to bring in. We need to conceptualize the way we actually do teach, and perhaps after that we could be looking at how then to move into specific subject matters of how to teach different, topics or courses and the like. But what could perhaps drive this is research itself. So maybe we think of a research output.
Yeah, so, I mean, you're singing my song. I mean, I think one of the things that could be really useful, but it is a big project, is to write textbooks, right? Textbooks. And I was thinking the other day, I know that there was a project, what was that group called? They no longer really exist. I mean, in the 70s or something, there were textbooks that were written. I think I've got one on my shelves for economic journalism and such like. But I'm not aware of a proper attempt to write a series, right? I mean, there are books here and there that are used that are African, but not many. I mean, that's why I wanted this list. And thanks to those who've sent me an email copy, by the way. And those who haven't, I will be harassing you by email. And those who've eaten the lists that were written, which is my only possible conclusion because they've disappeared, vengeance will be swift. But, I think that's a really interesting project, but it is a big project. We would then, we would need to, I mean, you want to create something of real quality. But I think it's an exciting thing that we could do, and we can find a publisher, and particularly if we can say to the publisher, look, here are, 20, 30 journalism schools who will use these books. It's something that can be done.
Centers of excellence, and there's a curriculum there. So I was thinking every day with this funding, maybe we as a network could apply for funding for coming again together to start to work on producing a series of textbooks for
Mm.
the continent.
Mm-hmm.
We have strong arguments for supporting funding for that.
Mm.
When we could put our heads together to write up the proposal.
Mm. Exactly. Mm. Yeah, no, I think that's yeah, I think that's definitely possible. I mean, one would need to think through process, right? What, you know, how do you, where do you start? And I mean, I've written the ethics book that's sometimes used, but it's a, you know, it's not a quick thing. And particularly if you want to get buy-in from a lot of people and input from a lot of people, different perspectives, you know, that also needs organizing. But I think that's a really great idea. The other thing that I think is shorter term potentially, but could be really interesting is, I mean, we could do a kind of a survey of what happens to our graduates in different countries. Where do they go? You know, how many of them actually end up with state broadcasters? How many of them end up with, you know, communications officers of government? How many of them actually do journalism? How many of them? I mean, I taught at Addis Ababa University some years ago, and 90% of the people doing masters were going to work for big international NGOs as communications officers, because that's where the money is, right? I'm not saying that's the case everywhere, but you know, I think that would be, and I think it would be, I don't know whether it would need money, but I mean, it would be a really interesting thing to do. Why was there such a stir at the end there, Enoch and Bongi? They go to? Yeah, well, exactly. You see, that's one of the problems. But I think that's an interesting research project that we could do, right? Okay, any other thoughts? I mean, yeah, there's... Katya, any ideas? Just because I'm catching your eye?
I think that is the big opportunity for us to create initiative that's trying to journalism and create synergies between different universities to develop some projects and related about gender equality, sexual harassment, discuss to access to information, even press freedom challenge. Today we learned several examples to how to include the local language in journalism curriculum. I think that is an opportunity to likely to be an opportunity to start this discussion in our institution.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you very much. Okay, I think let's draw to a close. It's been a long day. But I really want to thank you for the day, for your stamina. These meetings are quite tiring, I think. And for your stamina in coming here. I mean, it's been a long trip. We'll see each other, most of us will see each other over the next couple of days. And we're in touch on email and in all the other ways. If you have thoughts, feedback about the day, about where we should be going, what we can be doing, drop me a line, drop us a line. Again, you know, help us build the social media presence, help us to use that to, to involve other people. But yeah, thanks very much. And we'll see you in a bit for dinner. Yes, Bongi.
Just before you close, I was just thinking now quickly that we hold a lot of training workshops for journalists who are working and also student journalists, and often we don't get the reach that we'd like. And I was just wondering if maybe we could share each other's mailing lists of each of our classrooms, if that's possible, so that whenever we have those training workshops, we can invite directly the students, or we can share those opportunities with you to send along to your students so that they can participate and, participate in those trainings that we hold every now and then. So I think it would be great if you can share a mailing list of each of your classrooms for those opportunities.
Okay,
And maybe
thanks.
it would be great if they could also get to know each other.
Sure.
Prof, this is a historical day. So my suggestion is that we shouldn't leave this place before taking a group photo.
A group photo, of
Yeah.
course. How remiss of me. Yes.